It's time once again for Management 631. Time on your time, that is. This is the second of our Week 1 mini presentations. I'd like to start off with an interesting quote that we encountered in one of our early readings, the one from The Futurist by Harlan Cleveland. Basically, what he's saying here, and this was in 1982, is that fewer than 10% of the American labor force had been employed 100 years earlier. And my reference when I first read this was, to 1919 or 1920, which was when my grandparents would have been young, and I kind of considered the fact that they were both sort of in information-related jobs. One was a manager and one was an assistant manager. So then I kind of reflected that he was actually talking about 1882. Anyway, 1982 is an interesting period of time because it is the first time people started having or getting computers en masse. 1982 was, of course, 2 years before the famous year made famous by the George Orwell book and movie, 1984. 1982 was 2 years before the famous Apple commercial entitled 1984, and also 2 years before the Macintosh computer. So, where have we come since 1982? Here's a picture from that same article. That up there in the right-hand corner was a very modern office scene. A worker at her workstation talking to another worker, a kind of a green cathode ray terminal or monitor, and that was the height of modern officedom back then. So, since 1982, as I say, this is when we first had computers invading the workplace everywhere, and people using them to do word processing was one of the early things. You didn't have to keep retyping something. You could simply change a file. Spreadsheets were an early application, simplification of accounting tasks. All those things began to really boost the productivity of American offices. Around the early to mid 1990s, people started to become familiar with the internet. I worked at an advertising agency in the mid 90s, and we weren't using the internet yet, but some of our tech people, IT people, were all excited about it. And we had an agency-wide presentation about the internet and what it could do and what could be done and what were some of the companies that had internet sites already. And some of us left the meeting saying, wow, that's pretty cool, but how's anyone ever going to make any money off of it? So that's the true story of that event, or that period in my life anyway. So mid-90s, or actually mid-80s, people were starting to get cell phones. They were mostly mobile phones fixed inside a car. And then the first kind of portable cell phones were these large brick things. They gradually got smaller and smaller. Then came the flip phone. Somebody got the idea to make camera phones. People couldn't figure out why anyone would want to take pictures with their phones back then, but it was all leading to a grand convergence. Smartphones, first with the Blackberries that a lot of us are familiar with from the late 90s, early 2000s, and then the smartphones, the Apple iPhones and the Samsungs, and some of the other Droid products really kind of changed the phone from being something you talked on to something you accessed more for computer type things. Texting, obviously, but also a lot of things that involve the internet. Apps became kind of something that became part of all our lives that no one really predicted back then. We have today all permutation of tablet, Chromebook, portable tech of every kind. We even have watches. My son has an Apple Watch that he paid way more for than any watch I've ever owned. We have now the Internet of Things. Our homes have connected devices, security systems, garage openers, uh, music systems, entertainment systems, largely controlled remotely via the internet or via some kind of home network. And all these things use and generate data. Our cars might communicate with General Motors or Toyota remotely. That's why sometimes we get reminders that our car's due for a $60,000 service and oil change. Even though we might not have had it that long, we might have put a lot of miles on it. General Motors knows that. Virtually everything today gathers and generates data, and that means a lot more data than we ever used to have. Here's a look at the explosion of data, the world's stock of data from the 80s until about 2008, 2009. Back before you see that funnel start to widen, we were largely in an analog world. We had records and tapes as opposed to MP3 files. We conversed in an analog way and then ultimately a digital way via our phones. The world became more digitized. One of the jobs I had, or a number of my projects in the late 1990s and early 2000 time period was when I lived and worked in Rochester in advertising. A lot of our business was working for Kodak and Xerox to promote or write manuals for, do a lot of communications around various devices which took the analog world and digitized it. So I wrote quite a bit of promotional material, marketing material, and training material for things like scanners and digital card readers, digital cameras, etc. So the world was become digitized then, and that's somewhat reflected in kind of a career point for me. So this explosion was pretty impressive too. There was more data generated daily now, every day, that is, than the previous 5,000 years of human existence. Pretty mind-boggling when you think about it. Another way to look at that is the raw number. And this raw number, admittedly, is from 2017. 2.5 quintillion bytes of data are generated daily. That's a number that I have a hard time wrapping my head around. So, and I'm sure you do too. So, what are we doing with some of those 2.5 quintillion bytes? 3.7 billion of us are using the internet. Last I looked, the world's population was, I think, somewhere around 6.5 billion, which is a lot of people. There are 40,000 Google searches every single second. Imagine that. And what happens every minute? Well, every minute, over 520,000 of us upload Snapchat photos. There are 456,000 tweets. The Weather Channel gets 18 million forecast requests. This is, again, every minute. 1.5 billion people are active on Facebook every day. Think of that. Again, that's a quarter of the world's population. And a lot of that population is in very underdeveloped countries where they might not have Facebook. So that means a lot of the Western developmental world, maybe a significant majority, is on Facebook every day. That says every day. Now, I know quite a few people that are on once or twice a week. So consider that. every day. 16 million text messages. I think my kids send a significant portion of those to me, and they're usually requesting things. 990,000, that's almost a million Tinder swipes. Have no idea what that's all about. 2.9 billion email users send 156 million emails. Again, that statistic is every minute. So, all this data has meant big changes for business. The way business works, the way it serves customers, the way it works internally, the way it communicates externally. Everything business has done has been vastly changed, not only in the last 40 years, but recently, and it's continuing to change. And a lot of people predict that change will continue to accelerate. In other words, no leveling off. So what are some of those major changes that have come about? Well, communications costs have gone down considerably. So have transaction costs. Barcode scanners introduced actually way before the 80s, or 7 or 8 years before the 80s, have been one of those things that's reduced transaction costs. It's no longer as expensive to do business on a per transaction basis. There's been a dramatic increase of both speed in both, actually. This is key here. The flattening of organizations that you guys have probably talked about in other courses has come about largely because of the ease of doing so, which is a byproduct or a result of the ease and flexibility in communicating. So organizations are flatter, they're less hierarchical, less top-down, some argue more democratic. Work is more distributed. You have fewer silos. Silos can be departmental in terms of the product or service that's offered, or in terms of accounting, finance, production, management. Again, less silo, more open, flatter organization. Key point. And another term for that is horizontalization. You'll hear that in one of the 3 main videos that we watch for this week for the forum post assignment. That very word. And you'll get this idea from several of them. Another thing is disintermediation. Disintermediation means essentially taking out intermediaries, middlemen. Fewer people in organizations from the point of development or manufacture or creation to the point where it is delivered, fewer people to produce things, less levels. When I was in the advertising business early in my career, we would use our word processors, which were obviously just like Word today, but we would type our ad copy, then the ad copy would go to an art director who would mark it up, who would send the marked up copy out to a type house via calling the type salesperson. The type salesperson would come and talk to the art director about the type that was to be set. He would take it back, or she would take it back to her type house. They would set the type, and a day or 2 later, the salesperson from the type house would deliver the type. You know, the type that's in the ad. Well, it has probably been since the mid-90s since the last type house shut its doors. In other words, with first the Macintosh computer system, but all computer systems, you basically, when you type, you are setting type. Well, it might not be the ideal font, but you're essentially setting type as you type. So that's just one example of disintermediation from my own career. Other changes, and these come out in a couple of the videos. Variable pricing is possible. If you've ever priced airline tickets and seen that the prices tend to change every day, I typically don't buy airplane tickets too early because the prices are too high, but I don't wait too late either. And this is because of the variable pricing. Don't quote me on this because I'm probably wrong, but I always think it's best to wait somewhere till about 2 weeks to a week and a half to buy plane tickets. Most places. That's because if I buy, it seems like they're higher when I buy early and higher when I buy at the last minute. And the airlines do this based on variable demand. So we have workplace changes. The aforementioned flattening of organizations. The gig economy. A lot of people work as freelancers, as sole proprietors now, as contractors. One of the videos talks about this and how it's brought about changes in workplaces because employees are hired by personnel and freelancers were hired by purchasing. And how does business reconcile this? Now, I know that I've done a lot of contract work, and I don't think I've ever been hired by purchasing other than to get a purchase order for a project that we were working on for the company. So I'm not so sure that that's a spot on, universally applicable story that you'll see in the video, but it's certainly worth considering. Machine learning is everywhere. Siri starts to learn your voice, or Alexa does. They start to learn the way you pronounce words. As you notice sometimes when you are typing on your iPhone or typing something in Google email, these programs start to anticipate what you might type next. That's pretty convenient, but it's a good example of machine learning. In other words, what you do, what you say, how you use your device or your computer is being learned. Siri, for instance, knows the name of my dog. I start to type out B-U, and Siri finishes it as Buckeye. That's the name of my dog. Golden Retriever, if you're interested. Customer relationship management systems, they've been with us for the last, I want to say 15 years or so, and they're becoming increasingly prevalent. These are things that are employed online by places like Amazon, LL Bean, Patagonia, Target, wherever you buy online, or in store. And there's a famous example that I was going to mention it, but it's actually mentioned in one of the videos for this week of the father receiving mailers for baby items, pregnant shopper items, and going to Target and asking why they were getting these at their home since no one was pregnant. Well, he found out later that his 17-year-old daughter was in fact pregnant, and she had been buying things that were commonly bought at Target by people who thought they might be pregnant or about to be pregnant. The thing I went to immediately was the home pregnancy kits. So I'm not sure if that's what it was or not. But the father learned that he wasn't getting those mailers by mistake. So data impacts everything today, from UPS to sports to airfare to dating. Every aspect of how we live, how we work, how we live and raise our families. Somebody made the comment that UPS is not something like a delivery company anymore, like it was when I worked for it in college. UPS is a technology company that owns trucks. UPS is a very good model for efficient logistics, management of data, use of data, and that description is not far off. Although, if they didn't have things to deliver, I'm not sure what they would do. So, Maybe delivery was the foundation, but technology certainly is the key to their current success. So, with all this data, think of some of the implications for life today that didn't frankly exist in 1982 or even 10 years ago. Amazon knows what you like to read. It knows what you like to watch and what you like to shop for. It always gives you pretty good suggestions, right? And if you happen to buy something, your Alexa will tell you when UPS has delivered your package from Amazon or a number of other sellers. Apple's iPhone can help you find your way to your friend's house, your parents' house. Well, if you don't know your way to your parents' house, then heaven help you. But it can help you find your way to a destination, and then it will welcome you when you get there. Isn't that nice? And as I mentioned a little earlier, Gmail will be more than happy to help you type your next note to your boss. So, here's a little visual clip from the first article we read, the one by Harlan Cleveland. This is the caveman cartoon. This is kind of the breakdown, as it was broken down then in 1982, information, knowledge, and wisdom. We're going to talk more about the differences and how we move from one to the next in week 2. But for now, let's consider the fact that our caveman here didn't have data, he just had information. And information is what we had prior to the digital and data revolution. So, rabbit eats grass, grass grows in soil, rain falls. This is the information that he has to work with. Wolves eat rabbits. He had, at some point in his life, acquired wisdom. He knew, based on the information and the knowledge he'd developed, living and working among the flora and fauna, farming, hunting, and all that, that if he killed off all the wolves, the rabbits would eat up all the grass, and the soil would wash away, and he wouldn't have any place to plant things. So, that was wisdom. So today we use analytics to help us make sense of data and move us to information, to knowledge, and wisdom ultimately, among other kind of nuts and bolts, day-to-day advantages that data delivers to us. Analytics involves using data to help us make decisions. Better decisions, hopefully, than we as individuals or we even as organizations, collections of people, can do through typical heuristics, intuition, even long experience, and kind of knowing the job top to bottom can sometimes be done better or at least aided. I like to think aided and helped by knowledge of analytics and employment of good analytical tools. So, business objectives can include maximizing profit, increasing sales really too. Anything you do to advance your company or your organization. It can help us minimize costs, reduce financial risks. It can help us improve outcomes, reduce crime. The list could literally fill quintillion bytes. Well, maybe I'm exaggerating there. But analytics is essentially using data to make accurate predictions about quantities of interest. That's the kind of most nut and bolts description of analytics, especially from a predictive standpoint. You'll hear prescriptive analytics discussed too. Prescriptive being what to do to fix something. So analytics always requires mathematical models which are data-driven. And it's made possible by the speed, the power, the capability of today's technology. Hopefully, we beat heuristics, intuition, experience through our analytical tools. We gain insight, clarity, and ideally, we get the basis for action. What can we do? What can we do to gain a competitive advantage? What can we do to increase graduation rates? What can we do to reduce theft in our stores? That sort of thing. So, we're going to be touching, but not getting deep experience with a couple of tools, although I have a feeling some of you probably have pretty deep experience already with Excel, maybe Google Sheets. We're going to be using Google Sheets. You can also use Excel, although you might have to convert. And we're going to be using a statistical program known as R. R is an open source statistical program that basically is quickly becoming the de facto tool for computing, statistical computing, and statistical graphics. It's used by statisticians, analysts, data miners, and others. R has vast capabilities. In order to get some of these vast capabilities, though, it requires basically a number of graduate courses and several years of experience to fully maximize. So we won't be getting fully into all the things R can do, but at least you'll be introduced to its capabilities and be able to apply it a little bit to some of our tasks later in the semester, or in the course, I should say. So, Google Sheets and R. I urge you guys, even in week 1, to start looking at the Google Sheets tutorials. You'll probably learn a few things that you didn't know, even if you're experienced. I know every time I look at these things or read my Excel book, I learn something new. So we'll kind of start where we ended with another quote from the futurist. I am, as a hobby, interested in the American Civil War. I did a thesis for it in one of my master's programs. And one of the things I came to realize was one of the reasons the North ultimately won, well, manpower had a lot to do with it, and the fact that the South was becoming depleted. But some of this was the result of the North's use of technology at the time. The North had a very much more developed telegraph system, to the point where later in the war, Lincoln and his generals and his Defense Department officials could be sitting in Washington getting real-time telegraph information from the generals in the field, Grant, Sheridan, Sherman, whoever, and they could communicate back with them. So that gave them a vast advantage over the South, who basically was the generals, and the generals using only their own intuition at the time, not being able to employ the minds and insights of others. So that was a technology advantage. And in addition, the North did other things that were kind of innovative then. They were the first to use aerial reconnaissance as a military tool. Starting in 1863 or 1864, they sent people up in balloons to survey enemy troops. So, as this says, information has always been the basis of a human organization. An organization doesn't come together without communication, right? People with better or more recent information, generals with faster couriers, kings with spies, ambassadors, etc., always held sway over the rest of mankind. Again, a quote from the Futurist article, and I think a good place to leave it for this week. Thanks a lot, and see you online once again.